99 Jesus. 99 Jesus.
Welcome to the 99 Hustles podcast. I'm your host, Nick Carter.
And I'm your co-host, International Fees.
And today we got something really special planned. Fees, if you want to go ahead and jump into it.
Absolutely. Like Nick said, we have something really special planned for you guys today. Today, we are debuting a new segment titled Emerging Trends. As you all know, we started this podcast during the pandemic as we both experienced a moment of reflection to kind of think about how we could do more to help people achieve financial freedom and just overall security. COVID-19 has changed so much about everyday life. So we felt it would be appropriate to kind of discuss emerging trends and innovations that honestly will become part of the new normal. To kind of get things going, the first segment, the first episode will be all about psychedelics.
Psychedelics. I know that sounds scary. It sounds
Sounds
crazy.
crazy.
The
Sounds
headline,
very 70s.
the headline for the video, it sounds totally crazy, but psychedelics as a real industry is something we're starting to see now. It does have that stigma attached, like Fee just said, from the 70s to where, but you guys have to realize in the early 1900s, psychedelics were one of the biggest medicines, and it was a part of like a mental health revolution. What happened was it got away from the laboratory and the doctor's offices in the 60s and got out onto the street into some bad players' hands. And then you got them crazy, scary stories about people jumping off of buildings and losing their minds. So what happened was in 1970 is when most psychedelics were actually became Schedule I drugs, similar to marijuana, and they were outlawed. When they became Schedule I drugs, there were no studies on psychedelics from 1970 all the way up until recently. We're starting to see more things pop up. Johns Hopkins University, NYU, so many universities are studying these things, and they're showing some real promising results. Some things I think you guys should be interested in.
Yeah.
And we're gonna go all through these things in this video, and to get it started. We want to watch a clip with Kevin O'Leary, who's actually an investor in this industry. He's going to kind of go into it a little bit further. So,
and the name, if the name sounds familiar, it's because he's one of the hosts of Shark Tank. So this is a guy that Mr. Wonderful, Mr. Everybody's favorite Shark Tank co-host. So let's see what he has to say about this emerging trend.
So there's been a really interesting development. These are compounds and drugs from the 60s, for example, LSD or psilocybin from mushrooms. These are psychedelic drugs that were, at that time, misused or overdosed by people and became Schedule I narcotics. Even in those times, though, there was some nascent research being done because it looked like these, as medicines, could help some really difficult afflictions people suffer, for example, depression, or alcohol addiction, or now opioid addiction. So if you can solve for alcoholism or just opioid, just take opioid in the United States right now as an affliction, costs the country billions of dollars and all kinds of costs to society and business. So all of a sudden, a new industry is emerging, psychedelics as medicine.
That's huge. I mean, he touched on what I feel like with the last year, 3 big buzzwords, right? Like mental health, opioid addictions. Like these are all things that people have had a chance to kind of sit back and like reflect on their lives in a sense, right? And I think this is a good point to kind of make the distinction between like psychedelics in that market and marijuana in that market. The pathway that psychedelic companies like MindMed and Compass, we'll talk a little bit more about these later in the video. What they've elected to do is kind of go down a more traditional pharmaceutical pathway. So it's less about recreational and it's more about producing actual medicines to bring to market. So the same way you get like what's a current medicine for depression, like Prozac, for instance.
like a Prozac,
Yeah. But instead of going down that path, we're looking at psychedelics to kind of replace these things because of all the negative side effects that things like that have.
So you're not just getting high,
Pretty much.
Yeah,
Pretty much.
Think
Which
of
the
it.
problem back in the 60s and 70s was that
Correct. Yeah.
they were taking this and they heard it was great, it was good for you, and then they were like, well, let's get lit. And they got too turned up, so they they shut stuff down.
Yeah. All right. So let's check out what Kevin has to say more about the industry.
Intriguing situation. The anecdotal evidence, and I'm not endorsing this at all when I say this though, but when I was doing due diligence, I was hearing these stories about engineers on the West Coast of the United States microdosing and getting extraordinarily good outcomes, not hallucinating, but getting a tremendous productivity out of it. Now, I'm not endorsing it. It's illegal. But when you hear that kind of thing, that anecdotal information intrigues you to explore the use of these drugs as medicines. And so that's what MindMed is doing, and that's why I'm an early investor in it.
So specifically, is it LSD and psilocybin and mescaline and ayahuasca, all those that is experimenting?
All of the opportunities those present, because they're all different, and they all have different attributes, but the whole idea here is to make a medicine. You take out the psychedelic experience, because people want to be able to work and drive and everything else, and you want it FDA approved, so it's not illegal.
That's what we were just saying.
And if we get there, let's just pick one market, and I detailed it earlier, opioid addiction, which is such a wicked affliction to the United States and Canada and Mexico.
Yeah.
We're working on that. We're working on depression. We're working on alcoholism, all of these things, and they all have promise. So there's no guarantees when you're developing medicine, but when you can solve problems, take for example ADD in children, all the drugs we pump them full of. Yeah. Imagine if this works towards that affliction.
Sure.
So that's why I'd like to think it's wide open. All the companies involved in this area are doing a lot of research in a lot of different afflictions. It's not just MindMed, it's a nascent industry emerging here. I'm making my bets because I want to know that the company I invest in will never touch recreational drugs. I can't participate in that for a whole bunch of institutional reasons. But I'm happy this one is doing it for medicine, and that's a great enterprise.
Yeah,
sure.
This is a completely brand new asset class.
That's why we decided to make it our first episode of that emerging trend. It's as big as it gets.
It's amazing. And what he was just talking about, like as far as like the microdosing, that's like a secret that's been going on in Silicon Valley for years. I mean, Steve Jobs actually like accredits like LSD for helping them come up with the idea for Apple and so many engineers and people who working at these big tech companies, they're like microdosing. If you don't not familiar, it's like taking very small amounts of like magic mushrooms or LSD. What they're finding is that helps with like focus. And it's a ADHD medicine that works like better than like an Adderall or like your traditional Ritalin, and it's really giving people an edge. And like also he talked about addiction a little bit, so like there's like people using that, right?
Right. So I mean, you got people that are using microdosing and things like that are just trying to get ahead, find another way to make themselves more efficient. But on the flip side of that, and Kevin kind of touched on it a little bit with addiction, this is stuff that has already been used and tested, and the problem is who has access to it, right? And like most things, it's always been reserved for like the elites, people that have enough money to go to places and institutions that are providing this medicine under doctor care to these people. So you have so one of the most famous recent cases is Hunter Biden, right? Hunter Biden, the president's son, somebody that dealt with leverage. Someone that dealt with a nasty bout of addiction was able to go to a facility, and he accredits psychedelics with helping him overcome this addiction. So if this is something that has already been working for people that have the money to have access to it, imagine what it could do to people that don't generally have access to these kind of places or facilities, right? It's like there's so many people out there that are suffering from addiction and mental health that for one don't even know they are, right? Like they're just they're kind of in this cycle of just dealing with pain and trauma and not knowing like what it's doing to them in their future. So it's crazy.
And the reason for that is because like that's the opportunity, right? Is because we mentioned like Prozac, that stuff doesn't help. It just gets you more addicted, or like doesn't address the problem.
There's serious cons. And like it's funny because like we see commercials all the time, right? and they have like medicines, and then like they'll mention like the potential, side effects. And you're looking at it, you're like, damn, the side effects are worse than the actual thing I have. So
it's real. It's a real thing.
Like it's something, that's interesting. And the fact that, psychedelics became essentially illegal federally during the time where also like things like marijuana were made illegal. And we're learning now that a lot of that was due to like racist
war on drugs
viewpoints and war on drugs and things like that. So it's like the more you dig into this kind of thing, you kind of see, wow, it's always been there, and like past generations of people and have been using psychedelics to cure a lot of these problems. But
and
stigma.
Yeah, for sure. Important thing to mention. I think earlier I said like these things were around in the early 1900s. These things have been around for thousands of years.
Beginning of time.
You know what I mean? The beginning of time. It's just our country, for whatever reason, like Fee said, it's things, can be driven by race and capitalism, and they get banished by our stupid government,
Right. So, but it's interesting that, we're seeing now, companies like MindMed or a company like Compass Pathways that are emerging, and they're going down this path of like more traditional pharmaceutical, right? So like Kevin mentioned, he doesn't want to get involved in anything that's recreational, right? Because of, the kind of business he's in. So if they're going down a pathway of more traditional, pharmaceuticals, this has a much bigger potential in terms of like emerging out there for people to get, whether that's through investing to get involved in it, or even just for their own personal use. If they have addiction, or just, they're suffering from different things, there's something coming to kind of help with that.
Yeah. And with that, Fees just mentioned two companies. So like, I'm sure you guys are wondering like, what does this mean to you, or how could you take advantage of this? So we definitely recommend doing your own research, but two companies that we kind of just mentioned were Compass Pathways, as a publicly traded company. Also MindMed, that's the one that Kevin O'Leary's invested in. That's another publicly traded company. Do your own research, guys. We're telling you, this is like, this is a hot thing. We definitely recommend researching, and trying to figure out if, an investment opportunity might be right for you. We actually have the CEO of MindMed on the 99 Hustles podcast.
Yep.
Which is pretty crazy. That was extremely
humble
fun.
flex, no big deal.
Humble flex. Like we said, we're believers in this industry, man.
And this is pre-IPO in the US. No big deal. Whatever. We're just trying to, give the people the information they need to kind of get ahead. But
word.
What can I say?
Yeah, man. So I mean, that's it. I mean, we hope you guys found this interesting.
Yeah.
Like I said, definitely encourage doing your own research the businesses available, the possible investment opportunities, because this thing could be big.
This is definitely a huge emerging trend, and something that we'll be continuing to follow. And that, with that being said, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks for listening to the 99 Hustle podcast. Be sure to visit 99hustle.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our amazing bonus content. Please rate, review, and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. And always remember, there are 99 hustles. All you got to do is choose one.
99 hustles.
Yeah, we definitely got the best song out there.